Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to another session. Today we're going to be having a look at filth and how to purify yourself from filth. We're going to look at the types of filth, how to remove filth, animal skins, wells, and on using the toilet. So first of all, we should know that we have something called heavy filth and light filth. There's two kinds of filth, and the rulings associated with them are different. So what's heavy filth? Heavy filth is spilled blood, feces, wine, and sexual fluids. Light filth is urine of edible animals, urine of horses, and droppings of non-edible birds. The list is actually more comprehensive, but for our purposes now, we're going to leave it to this. And we did discuss other types of filth in previous lessons on tahara and such. So first of all, it must be known that blood from organs or veins of a slaughtered animal, like the liver, the spleen, or the heart, any blood that remains within the organ is not considered impure. Blood of insects and fish is not deemed impure. So insects, because their blood is, even though it's like a blood, it serves the function and purpose of blood, but it's not blood as we know it. It doesn't have the color of blood as we know it. It's like a transparent kind of a plasma type of fluid. And especially with crustaceans and that, like lobsters, their blood is actually blue. On contact with oxygen, it becomes blue, as opposed to human blood, which is red due to I think they have more copper and we have more iron in our blood. So the blood of sea animals and insects is considered pure. Alcohol made from grapes, dates, and raisins is filthy. So the scholars in the Hanafi ulama, they understood this specifically to be alcohol made into a wine. And alcohol is traditionally made from grapes, dates, and raisins. So any alcohol you get on yourself is heavy filth. However, synthetic alcohol is not. So what you get in perfumes, in beauty products, in sanitary wipes, disinfecting swabs that contain mostly alcohol in them, or suspensions of alcohol for, like you get in medicine or in scientific experiments, stuff like this. This is synthetic alcohol, synthesized, and this doesn't hold the same ruling as organic, naturally produced alcohol through natural processes. However, caution does entail due respect for other opinions, because in other schools opinions may differ. So as a result, we are cautious when we use those products also. However, creams, deodorants and such like are not considered najas in the Hanafi school. Just a brief list of heavy filth. Feces of all land animals, predatory or otherwise. The urine of animals impermissible to eat. The saliva of predatory land animals. Wine and all intoxicating drinks, blood that flows, pus that flows, sperm, pre-ejaculate, white murky liquid, wadi, we discussed this earlier on, menstrual blood, haid, postnatal bleeding nifas, dysfunctional uterine bleeding, istihada, and a mouthful or more of vomit. Most of these we've covered in previous lessons. There's a few that we will go through in this lesson. As I mentioned, you have heavy filth and light filth. Now the difference in the rulings with both of them is how much you can have on your body, and legally you can still pray, providing you can't clean it. So the amount of filth that is excused. So we have heavy filth and light filth, as we mentioned, right? And the legal rulings are different for both of them. For heavy filth, you have a 5 centimeter diameter if liquid, or 5 grams if solid. Now the way the scholars looked at it is, if you were to scoop water into your hand and then open your hand up, what would remain in the center of your palm, this little bit here, would be approximately a diameter of between 3 to 5 centimeters. So this is the amount of liquid of heavy filth that you can have on your clothing or on your person, and if it's under this, you can still pray. If it was solid, it would be 5 grams in weight of solid filth that would be acceptable on your clothing or on your body. If it was light filth, then a quarter of your body or your clothes. A quarter of your item of clothing or a quarter of your body needs to be covered. Past that point, then you cannot pray. An example of light filth. Now, some people would be thinking it's a bit strange. How can we pray with filth on our bodies? Well, in today's society, where we have access to water sources and our standards of hygiene are much higher due to our quality of lives, where we can keep ourselves clean more or less all the time. But in traditional societies, it wasn't always easy to keep yourself clean, right? So that's the reason why a certain amount of filth on your body is always going to be excused, because it's impossible for people in animal husbandry or people farming communities or people that work with animals, but even the general person, it's not always possible to keep yourself completely pure. And even if you keep yourself completely pure, there's times when you're not going to know and there's going to be some filth adhering to your clothing. Because traditional societies, there was the filth aplenty on the floor in the cities. When you walk out into the countryside, there were animals in the city, there were animal droppings. The toilets weren't necessarily clean. There were normally holes as well where you didn't have much access to much water, as we'll see, and other stuff. So a farmer who has a quarter of his shirt covered in urine or the blood of a cow. Now, for farmers, it's extremely difficult, as any farmer will tell you, to keep themselves clean from filth. They're working in very close contact with animals. Not only that, sometimes they're having to deliver babies as well. And in instances where farmers work with animals, they're always going to have a certain amount of filth on them. So an example of heavy filth would be a farmer who has a quarter of his shirt covered in urine or the blood of a cow. That's considered light filth. Now, how about water? If a drop of liquid, heavy or light, falls in a small amount of water, it all becomes filthy. Now, what's a small amount? We discussed this before. It's 10 cubits by 10 cubits. And with a depth deep enough that if you were to scoop it, the bottom wouldn't show. So if you were to drop a small amount of, say, urine in this, in a bucket of water, the entire water would become impure. If you were to drop an amount of a drop of cow urine, which is considered light filth, it would take the same ruling. So now the whole bucket would take the same ruling. So if it was human filth in there, then only 5 centimeter diameter on your hand would be on your body would be sufficient for you to now not be able to pray. And if it was solid filth, 5 grams. And if it was light filth, then a quarter of that water on your garment or your body. Because the actual water takes on the characteristics of the filth. So the bucket, if human urine now, you can only have 5 centimeters of it on you. The bucket of water of cow urine, you can have unto a quarter of your garment or body with it. How is filth purified? You've got filth on you. How would we go about purifying ourselves from this filth? First of all, you take off any visible filth. So if you've got traces of filth, no matter large or small, you would find a way to remove it. You'd either scrape it off. If it was dry, you'd scrape it off. If it was wet, you'd very delicately scrape it off. You'd kind of dry it with something first, and then you'd wash it. And sufficient is to wash and rinse the garment out, wring it out 3 times where you can't get any water out, and then a second time wash it, and then rinse it out, and a third time. Now, technically, you don't even need to do this, but it's a recommendation because it guarantees you somewhat more cleanliness than if you were to apply the other methods, which are not necessarily any less clean in the way they clean your in your garment. So the way to wring it is you don't wring it until you get the last drop out and you carry on where you damage the garment, and you also shear off the skin on your fingers as well, and then you end up with blisters. No, it's just a general washing, and then it's a rinse kind of firmly when most of the drops are out, and then you wash it again, squeeze it as water comes and goes. Then you second rinse, and then do the same thing, and then a third rinse. That is enough. Now you could technically, for example, if you're washing your socks underneath the sink, right, you could let the water just flow. If the water sufficiently flows for a while, it will take all the filth away anyway. Rinsing, obviously, wringing it would help. So even in that situation, if you were to just squeeze it, and you squeeze it a few times, as long as water has passed through that garment, it will take sufficient water passing through that garment will take the filth with it. Except for that which is difficult to remove. So in this situation, if you had dried blood So you've got dried blood on a white garment. Even if you were to thoroughly wash that garment, sometimes even with detergents, you could still feel something on the material, and you could see like a dull brown or like a yellowish stain that never goes away. Those are overlooked because you've cleaned the garment. The garment is now pure. It's left some minute impact on the garment, some residue. Maybe it's a chemical reaction that's destroyed something of the garment, or it's some minute residue of that blood that refuses to come out. Now, you're not obliged to keep on trying to get rid of that blood until you destroy the garment. No, that's not the issue. The issue is you take the means. Once you take the means, that's enough. So you try as best as you can to wash the garment. Once it's washed, it's washed. Now, you're not obliged, here's the key word, you're not obliged to use soap, and you're not obliged to use hot water, so you don't need to be heating water. Obviously, we know that by using soap, you get a better wash out of it. By heating the water, you get a better wash out of it. But here, what it means by you're not obliged is that it's sufficient for you to clean with cold water, because clothes can be washed with cold water, and hot water and soap is not always available, and certainly soap wasn't available to the early community, and in many parts of the world, even today, soap isn't readily available. So in that situation, you only have cold water to deal with. So you wash with cold water, and that will suffice. That's enough. Now, we don't take into account faint stains. We don't take into account even smells. Even if a smell, you wash it, a smell refuses to go, we don't take that into account. It's washed, it's clean, it's pure. In instances where you have carpets or very large garments, very, very large garments that you can't wring them out, you could have a spray, like you could have like a shower head, and you spray the carpet completely until the water starts to drip, and it drips and drips, and then you leave it, let all the drops drip out until it may not be dry, it's not going to be dry, but it's certainly not going to be wet, as in wet to the touch. It'll be moist. And that's considered like one washing. And then you do that a second time, and then the same process, and then the third time, and that would render your carpet clean. And you could do that with other large garments that you have as well. Now, washing machines. If possible, wash the filth away by hand. So nobody in their right mind would see heavy filth on one of their items of clothing and then just throw it into the tub and then let it wash itself out with all the other clothing that's in there. It's best to clean that filth by hand as much as you can from that garment, and then throw that garment into the washing machine. Now, modern washing machines, they have multi-cycle spins. So basically, new water's coming in, it's washing, the soap and everything's doing its job, it's churning itself round and round, and then through centrifugal forces, the water's thrown out, and it totally discharges from water, and then a new cycle comes in. The same process happens again, the water's discharged out, and then a new cycle. So you get like 2 or 3 cycles or even more. So in that case, it suffices the same as washing by hand, so that's fine. But however, it's a good idea to kind of get rid of the filth by your hand before you put it in, because it's only going to spread the filth amongst all the other clothes, and it's going to be a disaster. Okay, so here's a chart here, the removal of filth. A visible body of filth seen when dry. So remove the actual filth, except traces that are difficult to remove. And if there's non-visible filth when dry, wash 3 times to be sure. So if I've got an item here, I've got visible filth on it, then I would remove the visible filth and then I would wash it. If it's non-visible filth, such as what? Such as urine or the like, liquids, then obviously I would just wash it and rinse it 3 times, because I can't see the non-visible filth. That's the reason why I'm rinsing it 3 times, to make sure that that non-visible filth has exited. Whereas when it comes to visible filth, I will know straight away whether it's clean or not. That's why we said you can keep it under the tap sufficiently without rinsing it, that you know that the water circulated so many times that the filth has left. Okay, the light spray of urine is excused if each dot is the size of a pinhead. When you urinate, you're bound to get splashback. You're bound to get minute, microscopic, at the very least, dots of urine that fly everywhere. Right? In one study, they said that when you flush the toilet seat without closing it, the water can fly up to 6 feet or 5 feet into the air. So these are overlooked. There's no way of you avoiding these. So these are overlooked. So if you're urinating sitting down or standing up, we don't urinate standing up, but sometimes there is a situation where you can do nothing but stand up and urinate. But obviously best practice entails that you sit down and urinate. If you were to urinate in any way and you got a minute amount of splashback dots, we're talking dots here that are unavoidable, then obviously you overlook them. But you can also get droplets. Droplets are not excused. They will add up on your clothing, and then before you know it, you'll have a non-excusable amount of filth on your body or your clothing. And even if you had an excusable amount, there's no need to have the excusable amount. It's best for you to wash your item of clothing if that happens, whether it's your legs or feet or the item of clothing. But if it's minute dots that you feel that you can't see, then they're overlooked. But in today's age where we have access to water, it's very easy to just hose your feet down. Contact between pure and filthy objects. Now, I'm going to discuss the chart before, and then we'll look at the Imam Sharambululi's reading on this. So you've got a dry garment. So you've got one dry garment and another dry garment. When they touch and there's no transfer of filth, then the clean garment is still clean, even though it's touched a dirty garment, but they're both dry and there's been no transfer of filth. Filth transferred if traces appear. If one is moist and one is dry, filth transferred again if traces appear. And if the filthy garment is dripping wet, then obviously there's no way of avoiding the filth transferring from the filthy garment to the non-filthy garment. Let's have a look at this in greater detail. So the following are situations of filth not transferring from one area to another. So you've got a dry pure garment which is wrapped in a damp filthy garment that would not drip if squeezed, such that the pure garment becomes moist afterwards. In this situation, the garment would remain pure. A wet, clean foot steps on a filthy ground and no traces of filth appear on the foot. What are traces of filth? We mentioned before, it's color, smell, or taste. So if my feet were wet, I made fresh wudu and my feet were wet and I came out of the bathroom and I happened to walk over filthy ground, there were traces of filth on that ground. If I looked at the bottom of my foot and there was no visible filth on my foot, then my foot's clean. A wet pure garment is placed on filthy ground and no traces of filth appear on the garment. Likewise, a person sleeps in a dry filthy garment which becomes wet from his sweat and no trace of filth appears on his body. A place with filth on it is cleaned by water even if used, as well as any liquid that by its nature removes filth, such as rose water or vinegar. Now, we mentioned before that you cannot make wudu with vinegar or rose water. They may be pure, but they're not purifying. They don't have the attribute and the quality of purifying for wudu. But it's a liquid, it's a pure liquid. And if you happen to use that liquid to purify your garment from your heavy filth, it would serve purpose. It would serve the purpose and it would purify your garment. Milk is another one, right? We wouldn't really be using milk, but I'm just giving an example here. We wouldn't be using vinegar either, but I'm just giving an example. If you had no access to no other water and you decided to use these liquids to purify, would they purify? Yes, because it's a flowing, subtle liquid. Liquid enters and it leaves. However, we don't generally use these kind of liquids to purify our garments. We find other ways to do it. Complete chemical transformation is a means of purification of filth, like feces turning into salt or ashes. The scholars mention this in the books. They give the example of a donkey in a salt mine. So you've got a salt mine and a donkey happens to fall in and dies, is overcome by the salt and dies. And after maybe 6 months or longer, there's no donkey there anymore. There is just salt. It completely breaks down into nothing. It becomes dust and it becomes one with the salt. And that's a complete transformation from one substance into another. That in itself is a means of purification. And where else would this work? It would work with wine and vinegar. So which way does it work? You have fermented sugar, however they make wine. So you get wine that sugar turns into wine, and then process that wine again turns into vinegar. So it becomes from a najas liquid, a najas substance, to a totally pure substance. It started off pure, became najas, and it becomes pure again. So this is a complete chemical transformation. Again, this is enough to purify something. Feces as fuel. So when you burn feces and you've completely burnt them and they become ashes and they become dust, they become carbonized completely. There's not one element of feces you can say this is feces anymore. It's completely transformed into a base substance of carbon, and it carbonizes in your hands into dust, and that's a complete transformation. A khuf, which is a leather sock, or its like, may be purified by rubbing on the ground or with dirt. If the filth on it has a visible body, washing in that case is not necessary. So if you're wearing a khuf and you happen to step on dirty ground and you've got some filth on you, maybe dog poo or something on you. Likewise, if you're wearing shoes normally, if you turn them around, sometimes if you've been walking in parks and that, you'll sometimes step on poo and you visibly see it on your shoe. In that instance, if you were to rub it on sand or on the dirt or on grass or on foliage, enough that not a trace remains, that's sufficient, because now the substance has been completely removed. In that instance, you wouldn't need to wash. A smooth surface without cracks, like a sword, may be purified by wiping a surface. So a sword or a knife or a butcher's knife or a sword, if you were to completely wipe it without washing it, the wiping would totally take away traces of blood. That's enough to purify it. The ground of natural earth may be purified by drying, as long as no trace of the filth remains. So if somebody's urinated, so if George has got a son and his son urinates on the floor and the sun is shining down, after a few days, depending on how hot the sun is, there'll be a chemical transformation. The sun will break down the urine into its components. The urine will totally break down, and even the smell of urea, ammonia smell is going to go. There'll be nothing left. You may have a little stain left, but there will be no urine left there whatsoever. It's been a complete chemical transformation. That ground is now pure. However, you cannot make ablution, tayammum. You cannot make tayammum with that sand, because with that ground, because it won't hold the quality of using that material to purify yourself with. You can perform your ritual prayer on it, but you cannot make tayammum. By extension, walls, for example, somebody urinates against the side of a wall, trees, stones, concrete, etc. It holds the same ruling. A garment or one's body with dried sperm on it may be purified by scraping off the sperm. So if you've got sperm on your garment, when it dries, you can actually keep rubbing it until there's no trace of the sperm or the dry, flaky, whatever's left there, residue, and it's completely gone, and your garment has now been purified. There's no need to wash it. The hides of dead animals are purified by actual tanning, carried out by chemical agents such as koras or pomegranate seeds, as well as by effective tanning through the use of, for example, dirt, sun and wind. So if you've got, first of all, if I've got a halal animal, what's a halal animal? Slaughtered in the way of Allah. So a halal animal, then it's slaughtered, because obviously you cannot make haram animals halal by slaughtering them. So you've got a halal animal like a cow, and I've slaughtered it in the name of Allah. I've skinned it. Now that skin for me by default is halal. Now obviously it's going to be in a bit of a disgusting state. I'm not going to want to use it like it is. I'll obviously have to hang it out to dry. I'd scrape off all the fat, the gristle, sinew and hair and whatnot, and then I'd wash it, and then I'd let it to dry, and that would flake away the remaining residue of blood and fat and whatever, and then I'd start the tanning process. That's normally done through urine, pomegranate seeds and koras and stuff like that. Traditional tanning is quite a disgusting process, actually. If you were to just keep it out, a hide, an animal skin kept in the sun, right, would effectively be somewhat tanned anyway, just by keeping it out in the sun. In that instance, even if I found a dead animal and I skinned the dead animal, the skin of the dead animal would be, I could tan the skin and I would be allowed to use that skin. So if I were to find the carcass of a lion freshly dead before it's had time to decompose, I could quickly skin it and tan that skin, and that skin would be halal for me to use. That skin would be pure for me to wear now. After the hide has been purified, one may pray on it or perform wudu from it or collect water in it, like you have water skins. Traditional water skins were made from animal hides, and you could use it for putting water in, you could pray on it, or you could wear it. The exception is the skin of pigs and humans. Hides of animals whose meat may not be eaten may also be purified by Islamic slaughtering, as opposed to the meat which remains filthy. So again, an example here is if I saw a lion and it's alive, I've caught it in the African bush, in the savannah, and I could slaughter it, and then its hide would be halal for me, as in now it's purified. I just do the tanning process to purify it and I'm allowed to use it. Okay, a note on pigskin. Many items of clothing, many items, especially like shoes and the like, we don't realize, but the linings are made of pig skin. And sometimes you could actually get patchwork leather, where you get leather garments made where you don't know some parts of that leather may actually be pig skin. You're not going to be aware of it. But certainly when it comes to shoes, there is a greater instance that you may buy shoes and not realize that the lining of it is actually pigskin. And I've even seen bows, traditional bows made where the handles are actually pigskin. So that renders the whole bow obsolete, because the place you're holding from is filth. Pigskin has a distinctive pattern, and it's got 3 dots. The 3 dots where I think it's the hair, and the hair are pulled out, and it leaves these 3 particular dots here. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% like this. It could be close to this, and it may even be this, and you may not even be able to realize. So it's always best to ask before you buy items of leather that what the skin actually is. What about dogs? Now, what's filthy in a dog is its saliva, its meat, its excrement, heavy filth, and its urine. Now, by saliva, we're talking about the nose area. If a dog's nose touches you, you'll always get wet, because there's always going to be saliva on there. So that is what makes your clothes najas. That's what the najas part of a dog basically is. It's its mouth and its nose. But its body, its skin and its hair are not considered najas. You could be brushed past by a dog, or that dog could lean its full weight on you and walk past you, and it doesn't mean that you're najas. It doesn't mean you've got to wash your clothes or anything. But however, if that dog touches you with its nose, that's the hardest part to avoid, right? Because dogs are very inquisitive. The very first thing they do is they nose you, they touch you with their nose. In that instance, that would be filthy. Filth would be transferred, which is the saliva of the dog would be transferred onto your clothes. In effect, they take the same rulings of all predatory animals, because even with other predatory animals like lions and hyenas and tigers and the like, wolves, it's their saliva that's heavy filth. Any part of the body that does not have flowing blood in it does not become filthy upon death of the creature, such as the following. So, for example, the hair of an animal or the feathers of an animal would not be considered filthy, because there's no blood on it. But feathers, plucked feathers, if you freshly pluck a feather out, when it comes out, you'll see there's a point where you're gonna get some fat, and you're going to get blood. That would be filthy. But if you were to cut the feathers from close to the skin, they would be pure. An animal's horn, the claws of an animal, bone, as long as there's no fat on them. So if you were to totally scrape off all the fat and the blood off a bone, it's a bone. That would be considered pure. A deer pouch of musk, like the musk itself, is pure and may be eaten. The same ruling applies to zabad. So musk deer are very rare deer in the mountains of Kashmir and China, and they're distinctive because they have these 2 teeth that come out below, and they use that to forage amongst the ground for. It's like 2 fangs actually, and they have this deer gland, something very, very valuable and very precious. That in fact is halal. You can, if you were to kill the animal, you could cut the pouch out. It'd be something this big, and if you'd open it, it'd have like these fine grains, and it's a very pungent, potent smell, and you'd actually probably get put off. You'd actually feel revolted smelling it out of there anyway, and you'd think it would be filth, but it's not filth, it'd be pure. Thank you very much for attending. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam Muhammad wa alihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.